Hi everyone, Quiveen here from the comfort of my kitchen. In this video we will be concentrating on the moon. We will start by looking at the moon for this evening, the 27th of September, but we will quickly move to the end of the month and eventually into next month to see how the moon changes as it orbits around the Earth. We will also see how the moon subtly changes over the course of the night. Of course, the moon will rise towards the east and set towards the west. Everything does that, so that's not too special. Tonight on the 27th, the moon is quite close to Saturn when it rises into the sky, but over the course of the month, as the moon moves through its phases, it will move around us until it's almost in front of Jupiter. So that will occur as we come into the 1st of October. The moon is very close to full tonight if we take a closer look at it here. We can see almost a perfect circle. It's almost 100%, but there is a little bit of the moon over here still in nighttime. The difference between tonight and tomorrow night, it will be a little subtle to the naked eye, but there's definitely a difference in how round the moon looks, and that's because there's a difference in how much the moon is illuminated. We won't see too much of a difference between the 28th and the 29th. Really, we're seeing the moon a little either side of 100% full. So here on the 28th, we're seeing the moon at 99.5% full. It will reach 100% full at about 11 o'clock in the day, or 11 o'clock in the morning on the 29th. So by the time it rises for us again in Ireland on the 29th, it will be a little bit past full at 99.6%. The moon does orbit the entire Earth, and over the course of the night, its illumination changes. So how full it is, how much of this side that we're seeing is illuminated. Of course, it's very obvious that it's not all illuminated when we're closer to a half, but when we're already very, very close to full, when we're talking about decimal points of a percentage, 0.3 or 0.4% away from full, it's very, very hard to notice that with just your eyes. As the moon orbits around us, how full it is will change. But as we turn, we see the moon from a slightly different angle. So it appears to tilt or rotate over the course of the night. This is purely down to the Earth turning around. The moon isn't really wiggling like that from side to side, though it does wiggle in a different way. We may get to that later. For now, we're going to talk about the football player on the moon. Whenever I look at the moon, using my imagination, it's a football player that I see, rather than a face or a hare or a rabbit or a wolf. This dark area here is the head of the football player. This is the body. Here we have one leg, the other leg. Here on the edge we have the football, and that's the football player on the moon. It does take a little bit of imagination, but there is a good chance you will see these dark areas with just your eyes. A binoculars may help, it doesn't hurt to take a closer look, unless you look too closely. With a telescope and a full moon, you may be seeing such a bright object that it might actually hurt your eyes. Of course, we can look directly at the moon with just our eyes. It's not quite as bright as the sun, but if you're magnifying it with a telescope, the level of brightness can quickly get uncomfortable. If you are after finding the football player on the moon, whether you use your eyes or binoculars, the body of the football player on the moon is one of the most famous areas. The Sea of Tranquility, Mare Tranquillitatis, that is where Apollo 11 landed in 1969, roughly down here in the left. The Apollo 11 astronauts were not the only astronauts to land on the moon, but they were the first, so of course they get a good share of the glory. That is an area you can see with just your eyes. Of course, you won't be able to see the landing craft. You'd need an incredibly powerful telescope to pick out much smaller details on the moon, but this giant dark area is certainly visible to the naked eye. We'll zoom back out a little so that we can still see Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn and Jupiter orbit around the sun's equator just like the Earth. We vary a little bit. We're not exactly in line with the sun's equator, but we are pretty close. And the moon orbits the Earth's equator. Of course, it's orbiting us rather than the sun. So the line on which the moon is passing in our sky is a little different from the line on which the planets are passing. The moon still orbits us in an ellipse, very nearly a circle, but because the Earth is slightly tilted, that ellipse doesn't line up with the ellipse the planets take around the sun. So we can see here that the moon, if we move back a couple of days, was quite a bit below the line. As we move past full, it will cross over the line and be above the line into October. So we can see the moon there is above Jupiter, whereas a few days ago it was below Saturn. And of course, this is only from our perspective. Really, the moon is much closer to us than either of those planets. So if we zoom back in on the moon when it's full here on the 29th, we can see the moon is certainly below that line, the ecliptic. The Earth's shadow would be roughly here. So the moon is almost directly behind us, but it's a little bit lower than where our shadow would be cast. This also gives us a good way to see how close these planets are to opposition. If the planets, Saturn, Jupiter, or Mars, if they're directly behind us relative to the sun, it's almost like being a full moon. This is when the planets are at their closest to us and when they usually appear their brightest in the sky. Venus and Mercury, of course, are a little different, being closer to the sun than we are. So we can see that Saturn is just a little bit past its point of opposition, whereas Jupiter is coming up towards its opposition. We can see that neither of them are directly behind the Earth, but they are both pretty close. We can easily see both of them and the full moon in the sky together. If we move forward in time, the moon's position will change. So we're hopping forward by days here, and we can see the moon crossing this line. The moon will cross the ecliptic around the 1st of October, so we can see it there, just about to cross that line. It will do so over the course of the night. But if the moon crosses directly behind us, when it's full, if it sits on this line, that's when we get an eclipse. That's when the moon moves through our shadow. That's why this line is called the ecliptic. It's where the eclipses happen. So if we move forward a month, if we go all the way forward into October, all the way forward to the 28th, then we'll get the moon moving across that line just as it becomes full. And we can see that the moon is still moving across this line at a different position to where it was moving across this line when it was full last time. But the positions do vary over the course of the month. So here we are looking at a full moon there on the 29th of October. It's only the 29th because we're after moving past midnight. Here we are on the 28th at about 9:30, and we can see there is a little bit of a shadow on the moon. So it's almost moving into our shadow, but not completely. It's not a total eclipse, it's a partial eclipse. The moon is just skimming our shadow. The difference between a partial eclipse and a full eclipse is how much shadow we see on the moon, but the reason why we have partial and total lunar eclipses, as well as the reason why we have partial and total and annular solar eclipses, well, those things do get a little bit more complicated. I won't get into the sticky details just yet, but I do want to tell you there is a partial eclipse occurring on the 28th of October, so you have plenty of notice. It will be slightly easier to see further north. Letterkenny is one of the examples given. If you're looking up this eclipse, it will mention that it is visible in Letterkenny. So if anyone is planning on taking a trip up to Donegal soon, around the 28th of October is a good time to do it. Of course, it is only a very slight partial eclipse. We can only see a little bit of our true shadow, our umbra. But there is a lot of this penumbra, this sort of outside or partial shadow. So we can see that the moon does get brighter before and after the eclipse, but it does get dimmer during the eclipse. Even if it's not in the fullest part of our shadow, the umbra, it is still in the lesser part of our shadow, the penumbra, the sort of partial shadow around the real shadow. If you are very interested in eclipses, if you are the type of person who will travel across the world just to see them, the word is an umbraphile, somebody who likes the shadow, the same way a bibliophile likes books. That is the full moon, or very nearly full moon, that we're going to have over the next couple of days, as well as the lunar eclipse that we're going to have next month. And by we're, I do mean those of us here in Ireland. That's an eclipse you'll be able to see from our island, though you will see it a little bit better if you are further north. I very much hope you get a chance to see the eclipse, as well as the other things that I've mentioned in this show, such as the Sea of Tranquility. If you enjoyed the show, then please do like the video. And if you like this kind of content, then I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel. You can also check out more of my videos on the queebeanscontent.ie website. So hopefully I'll see you all next time.